We have seen how Federationism and racism operate in general in the OC. Now let's look specifically at their impact on local centers. There are about three forms that the Federationist approach to building local centers has taken across the country. 1. The first and most dominant form is that organizations and/or organizational representatives get together to form a planning committee for a local center. The underlying white chauvinist assumption is that these mostly white circles have more clarity on how to forge unity and the tendency locally than the independent Marxist-Leninists in the locale, who are usually national minorities. The guiding principle for determining who should be on the planning committee is who has the most advanced grasp of the OC's party-building perspective. Choosing organizational representatives as a guiding principle is Federationist. 2. The second form is that the planning committee, be it formed on a Federationist basis or not, becomes for all practical purposes a circle in and of itself. The Federated Planning Committee proceeds to struggle over political line differences between the organizations rather than establishing a local center and uniting the broader tendency based on the 18 Principles of Unity. The non-federated Planning Committee may struggle over one or several of the 18 points, the OC's first year, the draft plan, etc., and sometimes the Federated Planning Committee takes up similar struggles. Either way, they take up ideological and theoretical struggle without having united the broader tendency in a form to also participate in these struggles. 3. The third form is that once a local center is established, comrades make decisions and operate from a Federationist standpoint. They go into the local center placing the interests of their circle above the interest of the tendency as a whole rather than as individual Marxist-Leninists coming together based on unity with the 18 points and the need for a common plan to forge an ideological center. These comrades can view the OC only from the valley of their small circle and not from the mountain of a movement-wide perspective. We will look at the development of local centers in Detroit and the Twin Cities in order to draw out how these errors are made. In Detroit, DSC and DMLO chose two representatives each to form a committee to plan a local center, taking on the first form of the Federationist approach. DMLO was all white, DSC had one black member. The representatives from DSC were white. They saw themselves as the people who would plan the forging of the local center, despite the fact that there were a number of independent national minority Marxist-Leninists in the city who were a part of the tendency and had a firmer grasp of the correctness of the OC's party-building perspective than any of the white comrades on the planning committee. But these comrades' view of themselves was that they were the real Marxist-Leninists with the genuine unity with the OC because they were members of cadre organizations. They thought that their status as organization members meant that they alone had the clarity to forge a local center. This view of themselves necessarily meant a racist view of the national minority comrades in the city. These comrades' desire to form the local center along Federationist lines led them deeper into the racist and Federationist era comrades make in building local centers. They took on the second form of the Federationist approach to building local centers. The planning committee became another circle. They spent a year fighting over the differences between the political line of each organization rather than uniting the tendency in the city based on the 18 Principles of Unity and the OC's party-building perspective. They pointed the finger at each other and said, "Your organization is responsible for holding up this process," but the truth is that they were both responsible, and what was really holding up the process was their Federationism and racism. To show the absurdity of their squabbling, one of the debates was around whether advanced workers should be invited to participate in the local center and each organization's definition of an advanced worker and a Marxist-Leninist. But the bottom line was that the list of people each circle had compiled was mutually agreeable. The depth of their racism is further drawn out by the fact that a black comrade on the NSC warned them of the dangers of their Federationist errors and urged them to break with it and get on with the task at hand. But their white chauvinism prevented them from taking his leadership and respecting his political evaluation of the situation. Finally, After a year of squabbling and fighting over political line differences between the organizations and after the prodding and pushing of comrades in the NSC, Mady got involved in the planning committee and broke the circle games. Mady immediately began to share the 18 Principles of Unity and OC documents with other independent national minority comrades in the city. It was through her intervention that a number of independent national minority comrades united around the 18 Principles of Unity and the OC's party-building perspective and participated in the Point 18 Conference and the National Minority Marxist-Leninist Conference. Following those conferences, a core group was formed composed primarily of independent national minority Marxist-Leninists, 2 white independents and 2 white circle members, to plan for the establishment of a local center. The core group went through a series of 3 discussions, one on the history of the party-building movement, one on the 18 Principles of Unity and what forms of opportunism they demarcate from, and one on the draft plan. Once that process was completed, there was general agreement that a temporary steering committee should be elected by the core group to formally establish the local center and provide leadership for about a 9-month period, through the first 18-point study process. Following that series of discussions, the core group came close to falling into the second form of the era of federationism and racism in building local centers, that is, the core group almost became another circle. A proposal was made that 3 more sessions be held before a steering committee was elected in order to gain more clarity as to who should be on the steering committee. The 3 sessions that were proposed all had to do with ideological struggle and debate on various aspects of the 18 points. This proposal was generally accepted until a comrade from Seattle pointed out that to delay the founding of the local center any longer would be an error, and that although the core group was not a federated formation, it was in danger of becoming another circle. He further pointed out that the danger of the core group becoming another circle would be particularly destructive since it was majority black, and the rest of the OC membership, in essence the 2 circles, was majority white. Most comrades immediately united with the criticism and were prepared to move on to elect a temporary steering committee. However, 2 white comrades, Inessa and Janice, were in favor of adopting the proposal despite the political assessment everyone else was united around as to what it would mean. These comrades were in favor of it because of their white chauvinist view of the national minority comrades in the core group. Inessa put forward that she felt that everyone in the group could potentially be in a position to provide leadership to the local center and that the group needed to delve deeper into ideological struggle in order to determine who in the core group was the most consolidated ideologically. While Inessa had a sophisticated veil for her white chauvinism, Janice summed it up very succinctly for both of them. Janice said she didn't see the leadership in any of the comrades there and needed more time to figure it out. Both of the comrades had extensive knowledge of it or the benefit of joint work with all the comrades throughout their years of experience with them. What's even more revealing about their opportunism is that the questions they wanted to go into, with one exception, were those raised by someone who wasn't even in the core group. He lived at the house where the core group meetings were being held, and happened to be around one time and raised the questions, but Inessa and Janice wanted to see how consolidated everyone else was on these questions even though none of the core group members had raised the questions and in fact demonstrated the ability to struggle with the comrade who did raise them. Inessa and Janice wanted to engage in ideological struggle that should only take place in the broader context of the local center and the 18-point study group. And despite the arguments that this process would result in a mostly national minority circle engaging in ideological struggle cut off from the rest of the OC members in the city, their white chauvinism and failure to grasp the relationship between federationism and racism led them to insist that the process would not be an error. After all, it's only 3 more sessions. Even if it would only be 3 more sessions, it would have been incorrect to proceed that way. But it was also clear that given the nature of the topics, 3 more sessions would be insufficient to demonstrate what they were asking for. Inessa's racist paternalism, I think everyone here could do a good job, and Janice's overt racism, I haven't seen anybody demonstrate their leadership, were both based on the same white chauvinist ideology. The National Minority Comrades were all indistinguishable to them, and they saw leadership in none of them. They were demanding that the National Minority Comrades demonstrate a level of ideological and political consolidation much higher than most of the white comrades in the two circles. It's the same as when an affirmative action program is instituted at a previously all-white company. Everyone else in a certain job category has a high school diploma and 2 years of experience. A national minority person applies for the job who has 15 years of experience and 3 master's degrees, and the personnel director says, "Yes, but is he or she qualified?" And Inessa and Janice were willing to sacrifice the process of uniting the broader tendency by setting up a third, mostly black, tendency circle so that the National Minority Comrades could prove themselves to the white comrades. Despite Inessa's and Janice's protests, a steering committee was elected from the core group and a local center was established. The white comrades from the two circles came in and immediately proceeded to take the third form of the era of federationism and racism in building local centers. They came in operating from the point of view of their membership in the circles and the political differences between the two circles, rather than the standpoint of the party spirit. The steering committee planned an organizational meeting for local center comrades to develop a division of labor. At the meeting, the SC proposed that people volunteer for various committees, interview 18-point study, child care, etc. A few comrades at the meeting criticized the SC for not appointing people to work on the committees based on their knowledge of people's strengths and weaknesses. One of the black members of the SC pointed out that the history of federationism and racism in the city prevented him from having the fullest perspective on the individual comrades. He had never been a member of either circle. This was only the second local center meeting and he had not had the opportunity to get to know them as individual Marxist-Leninists. He only had knowledge of a very few of them through joint mass work in the past. These comrades were demanding that the mostly black SC appoint people to the committees even though the circle's federationism and racism had historically prevented the black comrades from knowing the ideological strengths and weaknesses of the individual members. They came into the local center and placed demands on the SC from a federationist standpoint. In addition, for the first few meetings the white comrades generally had not spoken up, and not struggled around the presentations made by the SC. This was the first time all members from each circle had sat together in the same room since the split. Rather than expressing their views on the SC's presentation on the OC's party-building perspective, the purpose of local centers, etc., and struggling in an open, tendency-wide form, they kept quiet and protected their individual circles. They were again taking on the third form of the federationist approach to local centers. They came into the local center operating from the standpoint of their own circles and liquidating the party spirit. The SC knew that some of the comrades had differences with the presentations and posed them as sharply as possible in order to spark lively discussion. But the white comrades saw it as more important to protect their circles rather than struggle as individuals and struggle for the correct perspective on the tasks before them. As one black comrade pointed out, their silence in the meetings represented the same old federationist and racist errors they'd made in the past. He had no way of knowing which of the white comrades he had unity with and could struggle for unity with others because they were shutting him out of ideological struggle by remaining silent. Their federationism and racism held back the ideological struggle, and their refusal to struggle with the mostly black SC around the presentations held back the process of building multinational unity. The Twin Cities Local Center also developed along federationist lines. They went through the three forms of the era in fairly rapid succession, and at points took on more than one form simultaneously. They formed the local center planning committee along federationist lines. The planning committee and subsequently the local center became a circle struggling and fighting over political line differences between the circles therein rather than opening up the process to the broader tendency. Initially there was a group of representatives from the circles meeting to plan the forging of the local center. After 3 meetings, The entire OC membership met as a whole, then a group of circle representatives started meeting as a planning group, with the entire membership meeting intermittently. Regardless of the form, the essence was the same. 4 organizations got together, one with a single national minority member and another with 2 national minority members. Eventually one of the organizations split in 2, and made it a group of 5 circles. Rather than working toward the formation of the local center on the basis of the 18 points in the OC process, these circles got right down to the business of struggling over political line differences between each of them. All this, of course, under the guise of consolidating around the OC process. The fact of the matter was that these comrades came together to engage in the ideological, political and theoretical struggle based on differences between the circles and outside of the context of the broader tendency and its level of unity. They formed the planning committee based on organizational representation rather than those most capable of assuming the tasks. Then the planning committee and the local center became a 6th circle, an arena for conducting struggle cut off from the rest of the tendency. The group of 5 circles, also known as the Twin Cities Local Center, contained cadre who all had contact with a number of advanced national minority forces and national minority Marxist-Leninists in the area. They had been working with them at the workplace, through solidarity work, and/or had known them for years when they worked together in the civil rights and other movements. But the view of the comrades at the time was that the circles had to settle their differences before doing any kind of outreach because independents would be too confused by the quibblings between the circles taking place in the local center. And further, that if they were going to do any outreach to national minorities, they would have to be especially careful to first resolve their differences because national minorities have a low tolerance for confusion and would become demoralized and leave the OC. In other words, national minorities are incapable of providing political leadership and cutting through the bullshit in order to move the process forward. They are too ignorant to come in and understand exactly what's going on and in fact set the correct process in motion. After all, mass work is their only real concern. They have no genuine commitment to party building. These comrades' white chauvinism led them to think that the national minority comrades would be lost in the high level of political struggle in the local center and get frustrated and leave. That's why most of them drop out of school, too. All this struggle was taking place, too, in the virtual absence of the few national minority comrades who were members of some of the circles. In the case of one circle, they told comrades they had 2 black women members. The comrades from this organization told everyone that all their women cadre, 2 black and 2 white, were not interested in the OC and were only interested in mass work. The 2 white women did attend one meeting. But the black comrades never attended a meeting. The circle comrades told everyone that the black comrades may be interested in meeting with some of them around areas of mass work, but certainly not OC matters. Even if these comrades' view was that the all-sided tasks of party building are unimportant, they were excluded from a process where struggle could take place around that perspective. If the black comrades prevented them from struggling with them against an erroneous view, and they did not think the black comrades had anything to contribute to the ideological struggle, anyway. If they viewed these comrades as their equals, they would have either united with their perspective and only engaged in mass work, too, or they would have struggled for their participation in the local center. In summary, the 3 forms of the Federationist approach to building local centers that have been manifested thus far in the OCR. The planning committee is formed by organizations sending representatives to that body rather than forming it based on those comrades with the most clarity on the task, be they members of cadre organization or not. The planning committee becomes a circle in itself debating political lines of organizations or questions before the OC, rather than moving ahead to establish a local center. Members of cadre organizations come into the local center placing the interests of their small circles above those of the broader tendency. The examples from the Detroit and Twin Cities local centers show the inherent racism in the Federationist approach. Confining the ideological struggle to small circles saps the life out of any genuine attempt to build multinational unity in the party-building movement. While the comrades from the Twin Cities and Detroit made errors bearing out the interrelationship between Federationism and racism, racist errors have been made in the process of building local centers that are not directly bound up with Federationism. The comrades from the Twin Cities made such an error. When the local center finally did develop a plan for outreach, the comrades drew a list of people to join the 18-point study. This was a list of about 80 to 100 people who ranged from progressive forces to Marxist-Leninists. Of that list of 80 to 100 people, 3 or 4 were national minorities. The bulk of the more politically advanced comrades with whom the white comrades work in the mass movement were excluded from the list. Why were they excluded? Because mildly progressive white people are more easy to unite with around the 18 points than any national minority Marxist-Leninist or advanced worker, right? National minority Marxist-Leninists and advanced workers who are leading proletarian and revolutionary struggles have too many problems to unite with the 18 principles of unity right now. Besides, this is for whites only. National minorities have no place here. This is the view that their practice reflected. Another example of racist errors in building local centers was manifested in the Baltimore, D.C. local center and in Atlanta. In both cases the errors were rooted in comrades' racist paternalism. Comrades in both locales allowed black comrades who had fundamental disunity with the OC to disrupt the process. Their racist paternalism led them to violate the unity of the OC in order to allow these comrades to participate in the process. They were more concerned with a good head count than the political unity of the OC, and allowed comrades who held opportunist positions to hold things back. The view was any black comrade rather than only those who united with the 18 principles of unity. The underlying assumption behind it was that there are no genuine Marxist-Leninists who are national minorities. This assumption led the white comrades to expect less from national minorities, lower the level of unity, in order to have a good head count in the OC process. The effect was that their white chauvinism served to obstruct the building of multinational unity.